Um, First of all, I'd just like to thank Leeds Trinity for inviting me back. It's a fantastic honour to be here, and as Mike says, last year I was enrolled on the postgraduate broadcast journalism course. To be invited back, honestly, is something I never ever thought could happen to me. So Mike's right, you know, it could be you next year. These kind of things do happen, and for those who were here yesterday when Jeff Stelling was speaking, it's a very similar thing. You know, it can happen. So keep believing is my first message. I'd also like to apologise if I look tired today. It's because of how hard literally my job is, and I'll get to that in a minute. And one of the drawbacks of being on TV is you're always bothered about the way that you look. It's unfortunate, but it's just one of those things. So the way that I'm going to talk today is I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself and my journey into journalism, and then I'll tell you a little bit about Made in Leeds. And the most obvious place to start actually is this word, honesty. As a journalist, you must always be honest. You can exaggerate, you can sensationalise, you can embellish, but you must always be honest. Now, one trainee told me that she was at a community radio station whilst training, and they had a morning meeting of sorts, as you do in every place that you go to, a production meeting where you talk about the prospects for the coming week. And she was asked if she was aware of a week that was happening. Now, a week is something like Carers Week or Foster's Week, where there's an active drive to gather interest and support and awareness for a particular issue. And she said no. And she was told by the person in charge there that you must never ever say that you don't know, because it makes you look foolish. It makes you look like you haven't got a clue. Or words to that effect. This is terrible, terrible advice. If you don't know, do not blag. Do not say that you do when you don't. Because in this industry, in a newsroom, be it regional, be it local, be it national, be it international, if you lie on something like that, you won't be trusted. There aren't many chances. In fact, some places you go to won't offer any second chances. So be honest. A massive part of this job and this industry is trust. Without trust between the people you work with, between the people who you interview, the public, you've got nothing. And if you're not honest, you won't get trust. It's as simple as that. So never ever lie. So based on this, this is me being honest with you. I never wanted to be a journalist. Never wanted to be it. I had perceptions as a member of the public that journalists were liars. They spun stuff. They said stuff that wasn't true. It was something that I actually had no interest in doing whatsoever. And I sort of fell into the profession. I'm in my late 20s/30 now. And I spent the latter part of my teens, actually all of my life up to my teens, wanting to be a footballer. I had an agent. For one reason or another, it didn't work out. So I decided to go to university. I went to Newcastle University to do history. And then I got into radio presenting, decided I want to be a presenter. That wasn't working out, so I decided to go to Leeds University to do media industries, which was a postgraduate course, and to pursue the presenting even more, television and radio, and it still wasn't working out for me. So at the age of 27, having 2 degrees, not an awful lot, I was doing this. I'll just explain what it says at the bottom, just in case you can't see. Hashtag Love Fridays at the Viper Rooms, 2 fun cocktails for the bank hall ahead, free tickets available in town. That was May 2013. I was working as a club promoter. That was in Wetherspoons, and I was advertising a club in Harrogate, the only club in Harrogate, in Wetherspoons. That's what I was doing at the age of 27. I was also doing topless waitering, and you're pleased to know that photo is not included in this presentation. That just gives you a small indication of kind of what I was doing at that point. So that's what I was doing at the age of 17. Like I said, club promoter, terrible job, rubbish hours, no thanks. And a year and a half later, I went from this to interviewing this guy. Honestly, a year and a half later. It can happen. But being honest again, I ended up retraining as a journalist and going back to uni for a couple of reasons. I quit promotions. Things weren't going particularly well in my life at the time. And I was a bit lost. I felt I had no job. I felt I didn't have any prospects. Even at 27, I had 2 degrees behind me, but no real career. It was my mum, actually, that pushed me into it. She said, you know, you need to do something. You ever thought about journalism? And I hadn't at that point. Like I said, I had these misconceptions about journalism as a career, journalists in general. And she told me to check out this course, and actually I rang Richard Horseman, that a few of you might know. He told me that the postgraduate course starts in 5 days. Didn't really give me much time. And what followed was an interview, an exam, and I was enrolled. And my mum was fantastic. She actually offered to pay for the course for me. She still believed in me. At this point, again, I still didn't really have much of an interest in pursuing journalism. And I was here on the first day wondering what on earth I was doing attending my third uni. I thought, absolutely ridiculous. I'm in my late 20s, I'm at my third uni. Like, what am I thinking? I'm an idiot. And on the first day, I did find it very hard, and I was told just how hard it would be, and I was thinking, this really isn't for me. In fact, I remember, actually, I was walking with just an introduction. I was walking from the library into the main building, and I still had the cheque in my pocket. Would you believe? I still had it in my pocket. Handed it in for the course. And I almost ran off. I'm ashamed to say I almost ran off and didn't come back. You know, the cheque's still in my pocket. And I said to the guy I was with at the time, who turned into a friend, Russell, I said, you know, I don't think this is for me. This isn't for me. I want to leave. And I was glad I didn't, because I quickly realised what other people had given up to be on the course that I was on. One person had moved literally halfway around the world. Another guy had given up presenting, radio presenting, in Sunderland to be on the course, something that I wanted to do. I find that mad. And I realised how ridiculous I was actually being. Now, what followed was a year of intense hard work. Don't get me wrong, it was really, really hard. And I appreciate how hard early mornings are for students. Like I said, I've been to 3 unis, I know what it's all about, so thanks for all turning up today. I understand it must have been hard for some of you. But it was a year of intense hard work. But the rewards were there. And by the end of the course, as a freelancer and on work experience, I was going on a ride-along with the biker fire service in Newcastle for Capital and Heart Radio. It was on bonfire night, it was their busiest night. And I was helping to put out minor fires. I got to use the hose, I got to slide down the fireman's pole, I was going on a ride-along in the fire engine with sirens. I mean, it was every young lad's dream. You know, this was my life now. And it was one of the most amazing experiences that I've had. I also interviewed Johnny Wilkinson, not at the same night, but in that kind of same period. And again, that was at the end of this course, just as a freelancer and on work experience. So my life had dramatically changed in that year, definitely for the better. And I was still doing work experience as I graduated. And by the second week I was here, if we can go right back to that point, I knew that I wanted to be a journalist. I just didn't want to be an average journalist. I wanted to be the best. When it dawned on me the reason why I was here, I knew I wanted to be the best. And it drives me every day. And that brings me to another word, which is this word, jealousy. Now, part of the reason I'm here is because of this word, and I wanted what other people had. Now, some say it's a bad word, oh, you must never be jealous, this and that, but I don't think that's true. If you let the word jealousy drive you rather than control you, I think it can be a good thing. Let it make you say, if it's them, why can't it be me? Why can't it be me? And if you keep that in mind, then, yeah, it can be a good thing. The difficulty is that this industry is so difficult. It's difficult to get in, it's difficult to stay in, and it's difficult to progress. And you need every tool that you can have to really make a go of it. And this could be one of yours, it's one of mine. Of course, everybody's different. Yes, and of course, be humble, approachable, honest, helpful, all the buzzwords that you'll hear this week. But have that little bit extra. Have desire, have jealousy. Want what they have, let it inspire you, if nothing else, but never lose your sense of integrity, and never forget, more importantly, where you've come from. Now, at the end of the course here, like I said, I'd made contacts. Marie Christopher, who was then regional head of Capital and Heart, regional head of news, for lack of a better expression, came in and guest edited here and scouted me. And she wanted me to do some work experience, and what was work experience turned into freelance shifts, which turned into more freelance shifts. And as I said earlier, it led to me interviewing Johnny Wilkinson, but it also led me to interview David Cameron. Would you believe I interviewed the Prime Minister whilst a freelancer? It can happen. People think that those kind of things happen to full-time journalists. It doesn't. 18 months before that, I was working promotions. I was still interviewing as a freelancer. It happened. It happened to me. And it also led me, another fantastic experience, to be reporting on the eclipse from a school in Northumberland. You know, that with the biker fire service, the interview of Johnny Wilkinson and Cameron, all unforgettable experiences, but all whilst I was freelancing. So I know that there's this kind of perception that freelancing kind of, you get the raw deal sometimes, it can be a bit crap, you feel a bit like a dog's body. Not always the case. And especially, as Jeff was saying yesterday, with radio stations as they are nowadays, they're smaller, they get freelancers to do a lot more of the hard work, a lot more of the tough stories. So just because you freelance doesn't mean you're going to be tied to your desk. Certainly not a radio station, far from it. You will be going on interviews, you will be doing bits and pieces, and maybe you'll be doing the kind of stuff that I was doing. But ultimately, I knew that my heart was in television rather than radio. Now, Made in Leeds was a channel that was started up in 2014. And by January of this year, I wasn't really getting enough radio shifts. Freelance work, for those who do it or for those thinking of doing it, can be a bit sporadical. It's not always consistent. You'll have to go to different places, you'll have to get used to different things, and sometimes the work isn't as regular as perhaps you would like it to be. So I actually sent an email to the then head of news and sport at Made in Leeds, just asking if there are any freelance shifts available. And of course I got asked if I could self-shoot, if I was legally up to date with in terms of media frameworks, those kind of things, and all skills that I learned here in the year's course that I was doing. So yes, I could self-shoot. Yes, I'd passed my media law exams and public affairs exams, all because I was here. So again, opportunities don't necessarily come to you by just sending an email or walking in off the street. You have to have that framework, you have to have that foundation, and it's courses like that are offered here that you're enrolled in that really provide that. And I know it can be hard and a bit boring when you turn it up for a law lecture. No offence, Nigel. Public affairs mainly, actually, to be quite honest. It was awful. Still have nightmares about Morrison. Anyway, that's beyond the point. Yeah, exactly, yeah. But it's worth it. Genuinely, it's worth it. There are shortcuts that you can do to kind of learn stuff, but honestly, in the long run, unless you have those skills, unless you have those qualifications, you will struggle, because they look for journalists all the time in radio and television and startup companies, but you need that framework and you need that foundation. And I can't really emphasize enough how crucial it is that you go, if this is the path that you want to go down, that you take those things fairly seriously. So I started to freelance, and what turned into me just turning up and being a freelance journalist turned into me being a stand-in news presenter at Made in Leeds, again, whilst freelancing. I was then made a member of a full-time staff, to the situation now where, as Mike said, I'm now lead news presenter. And that's happened all in a year, in January. And again, to think that this time last year, I was preparing to graduate. You can just see how quickly things can happen. I'm not saying things like that happen all the time, but they do happen, and they can happen to you. Now, again, that was beyond my wildest dreams. And also, when you consider that Made in Leeds, which I will talk about in a second, gets 300,000 viewers a week. Massive. Massive big deal, and again, beyond my wildest dreams. So let's talk about Made in Leeds. It's tough. Okay, I'm not going to mince my words here. It's tough. For a journalist at Made in Leeds, it's hard. Made in Leeds is a channel. It's worth remembering. It is a television channel, much like the BBC, much like ITV, Channel 4. And I work on the news programme, so it's the equivalent of working on Calendar on ITV or Look North on BBC. So you've got all the things that come with a channel, but as a journalist who works on the news programme. I think people make the assumption that we're a community station in the true sense of the word. For example, BCB in Bradford, that many of you will know, they do a fantastic job. Don't get me wrong, a fantastic job. It's a brilliant, brilliant community radio station, and one I've had the pleasure of doing news bulletins for. But a lot of the people that go in there are voluntary. There is nothing voluntary, believe me, about Made in Leeds. Okay, it's really, really hard work. We have shareholders, we have money that's generated through advertising. It's not a community station where anybody can walk in and be a journalist. It's just not the way it happens, and certainly not in my newsroom. So the hours are long and it's hard. And just to give you some kind of perspective as my average day, yesterday was a very, very typical day for me. I was here in the morning, for those who saw me. I was interviewing Jeff Stelling, another perk of the job. I thought, this is great. I love days like this where I can just come in, everything's just a nice little interview in a nice little room. Then I get an email, right, Mark, you're reporting on the floods in Otley, and it was raining. And I was thinking, shit, really not prepared for this. So I was wearing these shoes as well. I was like, no, I can't do that. But you do, you go and do it. And there's me stopping on what is a busy main road thinking, I can see some water. Right, off I go, camera out, there we go, let's just film some water. Film a flood on the side of the road, then into Otley, filmed by the river. I was told it had to be a 2 or 3 minute package, and that's one of the other things about Made in Leeds. Our team is small. Our news programme is more or less 25 to 30 minutes long. We need to fill that time. So news packages on BBC or ITV would be, say, 1.5 minutes, 2 minutes max. An average television package for us, for those who've had the experience of putting one together, is 3 or 4 minutes, sometimes 5. So you can imagine the work that goes into that, especially when you have, 2 hours? It's not great. So after filming all of that, then I had to go back to the office, package that. On top of that, my 2 other colleagues, there are at the moment 3 full-time journalists at the Made in Leeds newsroom, were also on stories yesterday. So all of us are working on packages. As well as that, I'm having to write the scripts for the programme, having to put headlines together, having to tie everything together in one. And then on top of all of that, despite the fact I've got my own package to edit and Jeff's interview to edit, I'm also reading the news, which goes out live. Yesterday, just to put things into perspective, I wasn't walking into the studio until round about 20 seconds to air. 20 seconds to air, and I'd barely read any scripts. Oh, and we were also missing the top 2 stories. I mean, it was thrilling, nerve-wracking, and also a bit crap. But it does happen. Stuff like that happens all the time. You need to get used to it. And that's kind of just an average day for me. Another incredibly random week, and one of the fantastic parts about doing this job that I do is how varied it can be. Sport is my niche. I would love to do more sports stories. I'm sure there's a few sports journos in here. And yeah, fantastic. I want to be in Sky Sports one day, definitely, like all of you do. But when you're at local level, you don't really get to pick and choose. And a good example of this was the week that Uwe Rosler got sacked as Leeds manager. X amount of Leeds managers obviously been and gone in the last kind of couple of years. I was at Ellen Road doing a piece to camera, interviewing fans, editing all of that. The next day, Steve Evans was obviously unveiled as Leeds manager. I was back at Ellen Road for the press conference, asking him questions. The day after that, I was in Leeds in an inflatable snow globe. Yeah, an inflatable snow globe that was in town, a massive one, trying to catch the tickets that were inside, packaging that up. The day after that, I was at a shed company in Leeds who'd just been given enough money to build a zombie-proof shed. That was my week, and then on the Friday, I was back at Leeds United doing a press conference, and that's how varied the job is. It's strange, and at the end of that week, I was like, did that really happen? But then, you get used to those weeks. It becomes very, very average. So the work is hard. It's varied. You don't necessarily get to pick and choose what you do, but it's good because then you get used to doing different stuff. You get to do the hard stuff, and you get to do the soft stuff. So the hard stuff, the court cases, the horrendous rape and attack that happened in Beeston, for example, we covered. We also covered, most recently, a cat that had a firework strapped to it. So those are the kind of stories that we do cover. It's varied and it's local. But we also go to the big stories. So if a big politician, Corbyn or whoever, comes to the city, we're there. But we do the soft stories, the small stories as well, that really matter to the local community, because that's what Made in Leeds is about, to local television. So if a minibus in Horsforth has been stolen and 50 people can't get to wherever they need to be because of it, we'll do it. We'll cover it. The regionals won't touch that, but we will, because it's local news, because it affects people. And I think that's the key. There's a debate tomorrow about local news, about Made in Leeds and local news in general. Does it matter? It does matter. It matters to a lot of people. And before I came into journalism, I was like, oh, local news. It's all about, I don't know, somebody's wall's falling down or something. Just like really, I thought it was just mundane rubbish. No, I was wrong. Local news matters to a lot of people. And when we go to jobs and we turn up at jobs, you can really see people, the difference in people, when you're there to cover their story on a local basis. And the reception that we get when these stories go out on the air really shows that local news does matter. It really does. And I know that a lot of people think, oh, local television Made in Leeds. Nah, it's rubbish. It's not. It does matter. And by the same token, it's not about being the first, because okay, the regionals and the nationals, Sky, will always make sure that they're the first. And there's a very good argument for being first in the industry. You want to be first to break the breaking news, the big headlines. You want to be the person that people go to get that information. But a good example recently of a story I did where we weren't the first but did things differently, and I feel, dare I say, slightly better, was the tragic story of Sky Thompson. Now, for those of you who aren't aware, Sky Thompson was a 17-year-old Leeds United season ticket holder, and she tragically died at home just on a normal Friday morning. It's exceptionally tragic. And her uncle decided that it'd be fitting for Sky to get a 17th minute applause during the next Leeds United home game. All the family were season ticket holders. The other side to this story is that Sky's mother, despite her grief, decided that Sky should be an organ donor, and her organs saved the lives of 4 others. So exceptionally tragic story, really, really sad. And I was touched by it. Now, throughout the week, whilst her uncle was organising this minute's applause at the Leeds game, they'd appeared on BBC Radio Leeds, on the Look North sofa, on air. I mean, they'd appeared more or less everywhere. But I wanted to do things a little bit differently. I got in touch with her uncle and offered to come to Sheffield, because they were from Sheffield, they weren't actually from Leeds. And I said I could come to Sheffield to see you and speak to the family, and if I can, have a sit-down chat with Sky's mother, with yourself, and the grandmother. And he was very welcoming, and they were all up for it, which was great. And I travelled to Sheffield. Now, as far as I'm aware, nobody else had done that. They'd had them in the studio or on the sofa. And again, I wasn't first to the story, not by a long way. The YEP had it, and then everybody else seemed to have it. I was last, very much last to this story. Anyway, I travelled to Sheffield, to the grandmother's house. And what I was faced with was obviously very upsetting. There was a room full of condolence cards and flowers. And Sky's season ticket was there. Family photos were there. It's obviously a grandmother's house, and Sky had many happy times in that house. But what followed was, I believe, a fitting tribute to Sky. I was able to sit down with the mother, and don't get me wrong, that was exceptionally hard to do that interview. And it was hard to not be caught up in the emotion of that mother who's grieving for a child. A child should never die before their parents, never. And it was really, really difficult. And I spoke to the uncle and the grandmother as well. But not being first in that instance allowed me to do a more fitting tribute, and actually being there after the minute's applause, which did take place at Ellen Road the night before, allowed me to produce a more rounded report, and like I said, a more fitting tribute that I hoped the family were happy with in what was exceptionally tragic circumstances. So being local television means that you're not always the first. More often than not, you're probably not. But that doesn't mean that you can't do things well. And there are challenges that come with being a Made in Leeds. Like I said, it's a channel. So there's a lot of programs that go out. I just want to state for the record, I'm not responsible for any of the content that goes out, apart from the news content. So if you've seen something you dislike about the channel, please do not bombard me with it, because it's not got nothing to do with me. And that's one of the challenges as well. It's about credibility. It's about credibility with perhaps you guys here who maybe have seen Made in Leeds and think, it seems a bit rubbish. And also with people within the industry. And I'll give you two good examples of when I felt that in recent weeks, our credibility within the industry had been tested. I was at a press call. A well-known sportsman based in Leeds, probably the most famous sportsman in Leeds, was having a training session. And there was Sky there was BBC there were radio stations there, Calendar was there. And one-on-ones were offered with the sportsman. And of course, naturally, you'd expect everyone to get one-on-ones. And, Calendar had done theirs, a few others were doing theirs as well. And I got asked to double up with a local radio station? And I said no, and it infuriated me. It really, really annoyed me. I couldn't imagine that the guy who'd asked me to do that, the press officer, would have asked Sky or the BBC or Calendar to partner up with a radio station. Now, don't get me wrong, there are some instances where obviously you will have to partner up. For example, when somebody's speaking outside court, or a police officer outside a house that's had a tragedy take place, or something like that. There are circumstances, don't get me wrong, where that stuff does happen, will happen, and of course you will have to do it. But when one-on-ones are offered and other people are getting them, I'll be honest, I was a little bit insulted to be asked to partner up. So I said no. I said I need this one-on-one, and I'm glad I did, because it's about credibility. Now, whether or not it was a Made in Leeds thing, whether or not it was a time thing, I'm not sure. But it's about that credibility and changing people's opinions of Made in Leeds. We're doing everything on our side to change perceptions of Made in Leeds, and particularly the news programme. We're not community journalists. We are paid, qualified journalists. Yes, okay, we're in our first year, 2 years of journalism, but we are still journalists. We still need the things that everybody else needs. We still need those one-on-ones. We still need those interviews. We still need those times. And more often than not, because we're local, we can offer people more time than anybody else. And that leads me to another situation that happened recently. Dylan Thwaites, who's the CEO of Leeds Fans United, that were going to take over Leeds United for a time. Now, when it looked like that deal was going through, there was obviously a chase to get him on. We'd organised Dylan to come in for a sit-down interview on the same day that Look North and Calendar had. And Dylan, and he'll apologise for this, never made it to us. And it was a big part of our programme. So you can imagine, he was supposed to come in at 4 o'clock. At 4:30, they still weren't there. 4:45, still weren't there. And we're trying to think of other things that we can do. Bear in mind, it's a big 5 minutes of our programme that we suddenly have to change. It was absolute chaos. By the time that we definitely knew they weren't coming in, it was 5 to 6. We had to fill 5 minutes from somewhere. We felt really, really let down, massively, massively let down. And we all felt at the time, I'm sure the other guys won't mind me saying this, that we felt that it was a station thing, that they'd prioritised the regionals over us. Now, the argument would be that some people probably feel that's the right thing to do. Back to this airtime, because we're local TV, we can give people more airtime than anybody else. We have the freedom to do that. Not because we need to fill the time, but because we're local news and because we give the people what they want. I did a sit-down interview last week with the Leeds boss, Steve Evans. Went out for 7 minutes on our programme. Why? Not because we necessarily needed to fill the time, but because we understand that a large part of our demographic, a large part of people who watch us, are Leeds fans. They want to see that. They want to see an intimate chat with Steve Evans. So again, we can offer time that nobody else can. So we felt a little bit insulted. And actually, Dylan felt bad about it, so much so that when the deal had broken down, the next week, the only TV interview that he did to discuss about the breaking down was with us. So we did eventually get him. Unfortunately, not at the time, but we did get him afterwards. And the other thing about Made in Leeds and local television is that it is so rare, so very rare, to get opportunities in television. And I mean gold dust, certainly at entry level. So when I was offered this kind of job, when I was offered this kind of role, I jumped at the chance because I know how difficult it is to start off in television. It's so hard. And even now, if perhaps I applied for, a national television journalist role or even regional, would I get it? Probably not. Probably not, because it's that tough, it's that hard, it's that competitive. A lot of people, I believe, offer the jobs internally, which is not necessarily a bad thing because there's other people chomping at the bit. It's so competitive, even within your organisation. So Made in Leeds offers television opportunities that you're not going to get elsewhere. Where else am I going to be able to go out on a story, even yesterday, about floods, decide how I want to tell the story, make my own decisions, tell it the way that I want it to, shoot the way I want it to? Where else am I going to be able to do that in my first couple of years of being a journalist? Nowhere. Absolutely nowhere. And that's one of the joys of working at Made in Leeds, is that you learn very quickly and you make those decisions. And on those decisions, sometimes you make right ones and sometimes you make wrong ones. It's all part of a trial and error. Don't get me wrong, if you consistently make the wrong decisions, there'll be a problem. But by and large, it can be trial and error, and you'll get it right. One of the hardest decisions I've had to make was actually last week at Armistice Day. And I was at the service in Victoria Gardens at the Cenotaph, the minute silence. And you'll find that a lot of the regionals and a lot of other organisations, they have a cameraman, they have a journalist, they might even have a work experience, all nice novelties. But by and large, and I'm not saying that the journalists there don't do that, because they do, but in particular, local television, you go out by yourself with the camera, with the tripod. Some of you have done work experience at Made in Leeds, and you know what it's like. You know, you are very much by yourself and you have to make those decisions. So I was at Armistice Day, the service, and I was already thinking about how I could package this up. How can I make this fitting? And I was faced with two choices during the minute silence. I could observe the minute silence and just put my camera somewhere and just film one shot of the minute silence, observe it. Or I could move my camera around and film other people observing the silence. And then in the edit, I could cross-dissolve, as you see on television, as you see on Sky or BBC when they're at services, into different people observing the silence. And I made that decision, which was awkward. It wasn't great. And I was moving my camera around, looking at people observing the silence. I was obviously silent myself, but not standing still. And afterwards, an old chap came up to me. And he said, "Do you know who you remind me of?" And I said, "Who?" He says, "A woman. A woman. The way that you were moving around and stuff like that." Now, beyond it being an incredibly sexist remark, a nasty remark, I had to state very calmly that I was being respectful. Unfortunately, this is part of my job. I needed those shots. I needed to get the different perspectives. I needed to see other people observing the silence. I wasn't being disrespectful. My grandfather was part of the Polish army that actually fought in the British army during the war and won medals. He's 95 now, and he sold poppies for many, many years as part of the Polish part of the British Legion. So I wasn't being disrespectful. Explain this to him. But again, got a bit of an abuse from him. And it does happen. Did I regret it? Not at all. Because then when I made the edit and I put the package together, it looked good. It looked bloody good. So I'd made that decision, and those are the kind of decisions you have to make every single day when you're on the field by yourself, when you're starting up, when you work for a company like Made in Leeds. You know, you learn very, very quickly to make those decisions, because nobody's going to make them for you. But it all is, again, part of this trial and error. And another unfortunate drawback of being a journalist, as Jeff touched on yesterday, is the occasional abuse that you get when you're out in the field. Doing piece to cameras are particularly challenging when there's only you there with a camera, because any person can feel that they can just interrupt you. And when you're doing a piece to camera at Selling Road, and it's especially elaborate, and you're on the last line, and some driver beeps you, calls you a twat, and then you have to start again, and it can be really, really frustrating. Another time, I was interviewing a police detective at the scene of an alleged sexual assault. Very serious, interviewing her. And a white van man drove past at that exact moment and said the phrase that we've all heard as I'm interviewing the police officer. It's awkward, and then you have to start again. And then again at Armistice Day, on top of the abuse I got interrupted by some guy. I'm on TV. As I'm interviewing an 80-year-old veteran who can barely stand up, have to apologise and start the whole interview again. These kind of things do happen, and you just kind of need to be prepared for it. But they happen to established journalists and those starting out just like myself. But you learn how to deal with them. You learn how to be professional, and you learn how to get on with your job. So local TV news, is there an appetite for it? Well, as I touched on earlier, I believe there is. When we go on these kinds of stories stories that matter to people. And yeah, I mentioned the cat that had a firework strapped to it by youths. It mattered to the girl whose cat it was. It mattered to people who were watching it. The minibus that went missing, it matters to people who use the service. Just because it's not picked up on a big scale doesn't mean that it doesn't matter to people. Local news does matter, and the reception that we get as journalists when we're in the field, when we go on these stories, is that yes, we do a good job, and we do matter. And what I would say to all of you is, and to anybody who's watching, if you don't know what we're about, or you don't think that we do good work, watch us. Watch our news programme. Watch the stories that we've been out on that say, regionals have sent, like I said, a cameraman, a journalist, a work experience, when we've had one person filming as many shots as you can, or you're filming a march through town and you're carrying all of your bags and you've got the tripod and the camera and you're trying to get, trying to follow the march and you look absolutely ridiculous as you're barging into people, just for those 3 seconds of somebody crossing a road. Look at the packages that we do and be honest with me and tell me honestly what somebody else would do differently. Bearing in mind, again, that we have to fill double the amount of time that they do. So yeah, instead of one voice, you'll be hearing 2. Instead of 2 sides to the story, you'll maybe get 3. But this is what we're about, so watch the programme and be honest with me and tell me honestly what somebody else would do different. But it is great fun, like I said, some of the stuff I've done this year has absolutely blown my mind. And to say that I was only graduating last year, I mean, wow. Like I said, the stuff I've been talking about is only a snapshot of the stuff I've been. Another story, just briefly, was I had to do this story about local honey that apparently taking a spoonful of local honey every day helps with hay fever. Fairly standard story. Not when you get sent to a bee farm and you're in the middle of 200,000 bees with the whole outfit on. And you're having to self-shoot with this whole outfit on as 200,000 bees are buzzing around you. Brilliant story, but not easy. But again, just a snapshot of the stuff I've done this year. It's the perfect training ground, and I really believe that it's the first step into the industry, which is the key. It's the first step for me, the first step on the ladder. The key is just perhaps getting other people to understand that it is. And I'll leave you with something that I told myself when I was trying to make it as a footballer way back when. And it's true now, as much as it is back then, and perhaps it can apply to some of you who are wondering, how on earth do I get into journalism? How on earth can I get into this industry? How on earth can I be a sports reporter? How on earth can I make it to Sky News, the BBC, or ITV? When every door closes, find an open window. That's what I believe. It's what I believed then, and it's what I believe now. Thank you very much. So feel free, if you've got any questions to ask, I'll do my best to answer them. Perfect. Oh, no, okay. Yep.
You said you went to another uni first and then came to it a bit later.
Yeah.
And after the same question, then advice like coming here, getting like go on to start with like, oh no, I'm in another uni.
Yeah.
Any advice how to get over it?
Yeah, it is awkward, but I think it's awkward as much as you make it awkward. Yeah, I got a bit teased for it, oh, you've been to X amount of unis. I got abuse from people back home, he's at another uni. But I'd say, in the nicest possible way, just kind of get over it. I had to get over it. And it may feel a bit strange at first, but, when I came here, by the second week after the initial, what the hell am I doing here, I realized what I was doing here. And if you keep that in mind, and you have a set path laid out for you, and you're determined to get there, then you soon realize why you're here, and you could get over that awkward initial feeling of, I've been to uni, or 2 other unis in my case, and you just persevere. So I think just get over that initial uncomfortable stage, and you'll be fine. It's not easy when you start off at any uni, definitely not, and then when you come in after having another career or another uni or whatever. But yeah, you'll be fine, trust me. Yeah?
You mentioned how important local television is. So if you got offered a job tomorrow at regional or national, would you take it?
Wow. It's a very, very good question. And I genuinely don't know the answer. On one side, I feel that I'm enjoying local television so much, and it would largely depend what job I was offered at a regional station. Like I said, I love the fact that I present the news and I go out and report and stuff. If it was a production job at a regional where you kind of tied to your desk, which is where a lot of people start, I would have to think seriously about it because I would miss what I'm doing too much. But never say never. I know it's the most rubbish answer you'll get at diplomatic, but yeah, I'd have to seriously weigh up all of them, and genuinely, I don't know the answer to that question. But thanks. Anybody else? Yeah? Yeah.
Competition for internships is real tough, and companies often want you to already have a lot of experience. So as students, what can we do to get that experience so that we're ready to take the position?
It's a really good question, and a lot of people will probably be wondering that. The best thing to do is, again, it's perhaps not the best answer, is to get as much experience as you can under your belt during the holidays. I know that you can write off to a host of different places and they won't come back to you, they won't reply, but keep trying. Keep trying to get your foot in the door, as Jeff was saying yesterday. Do stuff on a voluntary basis, turn up, offer to kind of, I don't know, make tea and stuff like that. You've just got to try and get in the door, but also it's not about your local stuff. So there's a lot of stuff beyond a local stuff to a really, really tiny village stuff. Even if it's getting involved with newsletters, even if it's in getting involved with community online websites like Beeston have one, they still have news and community events in that. If you get involved even on that kind of small scale, it shows that you're willing, it shows that you've done something, it shows that you're thinking about being a journalist as much as you can. And always keep your eyes open for those opportunities. And again, I'd probably say never say no, because the minute you start saying no to stuff, somebody else says yes, and you're behind. And that's what it is. But try and find, even on a small scale, stuff that you can be writing for, stuff that you can be contributing to. It all helps. All helps kind of put stuff on your CV, so when you do write to people or email, you can say, yes, during the holidays I've contributed to this, I've written to that, I've got involved with this. Even stuff like blogs, again, useful, certainly from a writer's perspective. Video blogs, again, very useful. I'm sure most of you have got them. Keep doing stuff like that, because now, more than ever, news is multimedia. The YP is very multimedia nowadays, and newspapers are going that way. So just because you're not writing, just because you do video, doesn't mean that you can't have experience and do that and stand you in good stead for when you apply for internships as well. Yeah. Hi.
Is there any unpaid work in Major Leeds right now?
Good question. Yeah, I mean, there is. We're always looking for people to come in on work experience, and I mean, it depends what department you go to. Like I said, there's multiple departments. So again, it really just depends what field you actually want to go into. But a few of the people here have been on work experience, and I think most of them have enjoyed it. So there are opportunities definitely for people to come in on a voluntary basis and help out. But it does help that you have it in your mind kind of what you want to do. And then it makes it easier for my organisation or any other to streamline you and kind of put you in a department which suits you best. So yeah, I'd say there is, and encourage people to get in touch. Yeah.
Major Leeds is quite new, and you said you're new to the industry. What's the rest of the news team like?
Young, in a word. Younger than me, actually. We're all in our first year, or first 2 years of being a journalist. So you can imagine that the pressures that we're under each day. Perhaps that's another reason why we're not necessarily taken as seriously as I would like. Doesn't mean that we don't do a good job, because like I said, we are a young news team, but we're good. I believe we're good at what we do. And Made in Leeds is new and young, and so are we. And I think in many respects, that's a good fit. You need that kind of vibrant energy about the place. Trust me, the stuff that we have to do on a daily basis and the hard work that we do and the multiple jobs that we end up doing. Perhaps somebody in the industry who's got 10, 15 years under the belt would maybe scoff at, the millions of jobs we have to do every day. I'm sometimes in the studio, 15 minutes before I go live, literally moving the set around. It's the kind of stuff you have to do that other people perhaps who've been in the industry a lot longer wouldn't. So it is a young team. Doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing. It just means that I think we're more eager to prove ourselves, and hopefully we'll continue to do that. Yeah.
We've all been in situations, I'm sure, where organisations and people don't feel like you're enough of a journalist, or don't have enough of an audience to bother them. Main Leeds has obviously got an audience to back themselves up, but what can freelancers do to prove that they're worth talking to?
Be good. Honestly, that's the thing. When you get given that first freelance shift, you have to prove yourself. And this is one of the things that I found really, really stressful on this course. I'm not going to lie, it was tough. We had people coming in all the time that were sizing us up. There was a lot of pressure on us. And like I said, Marie Christopher, who was the regional head of Capital and Heart at the time, regional head of news, came in, and she heard, I kid you not, I'd come in late that day because I'd had a doctor's appointment, and she'd been in all day. I did one thing that day, and I voiced a football report. Must have been 20 seconds long. And in that 20 seconds, she thought my voice and the way I acquitted myself was perfect for Capital and Heart. And she wanted me from then. And that's literally how it happened. You know, so be good is my answer to that. When you get that first opportunity, or you come in and people are assessing you, impress. Be your best. You know, don't be afraid of outshining other people in your class, because if it's not going to be you, it's going to be them, and it comes back to that competitiveness. And I understand what it's like as a freelancer. You know, you want the continuous shifts. You want to be given the first shift in the first place, and then go on to get those regular shifts. It is about impressing. And I'm not going to tell you how to impress, because it's down to an individual. But make sure you bring your A game, because if you don't, you'll get found out just like any other. But it's about being helpful. It's about doing things right. It's about remembering everything that you've learned here. And it's not easy, as you'll hear from a lot of journalists this week. It's definitely not easy. And anybody who walks into journalism thinking that the career is easy has no idea, because it's tough. But I understand that's what it's like. So be good. Yeah.
Would you say that shorthand is important?
Good question. I was shit at shorthand. I was terrible. I barely passed my 50. I'm not going to lie. I was awful at it, awful. From a broadcast point of view, no. Being completely honest, no, it's not. Because you record on a camera, you record with a phone, you don't necessarily need it. You have other recording instruments, and those are the things that you use. You don't have time to write stuff down as well. Okay, in the office you make notes, but they're sentences. For print, absolutely 100 million% crucial, 1 million%. If you want to be a print journalist, you need to have shorthand, otherwise you won't get those jobs. I did the course with people who went on to be in the print industry. Their shorthand was and still is exceptional, and they got those jobs because they could demonstrate that their shorthand was perfect. So when they're in court, yeah, they are making shorthand notes. When they're on stories or on the phone, they're always writing in shorthand. Nowadays, I don't believe you'll meet, even now, one print journalist who doesn't know shorthand. Your broadcasters, we haven't got a clue, but print, 100%. So again, it depends which direction you want to go into. So that's my advice. Print, certain. Broadcast, not so much. Great, thank you.